Hey, Dr. Betts. Welcome to my presentation on the human learning process.
Today I'm going to talk about how we learn as humans. I'm going to talk a little about how the brain is wired and how memory works. I'll also show how all of this connects to real world teaching and training, especially in high stakes environments. And then I will close out by discussing why understanding the learning process really matters and what it means for how we teach and conduct training and, in my case, design learning experiences. Here we go, Human Learning 101. So, when we're in the world, wherever that may be, we see, we hear, we smell, we physically touch things specific to that moment in time. I know for me right now, I can see the slide that I built for this. I can hear my wife talk to my dogs. I can hear the traffic going on outside my neighborhood. I can smell my coffee because I'm recording this in the morning. I can feel the mouse in my hand, and all that information, it has to go somewhere. And what happens is it goes to different parts of the brain that fall under the umbrella of the sensory cortex, as you can see here. So our visual cortex, which is in our occipital lobe, is in the back of the brain. It handles everything we see. Uh, our auditory cortex, which is in our temporal lobe on the sides of our brain, that helps us make sense of sound. And hopefully I don't say this wrong, somatosensory cortex in our parietal lobe, across the top of our brains, helps us feel touch, pressure, temperature, and just in general, each area focuses on its own sense. Together, um, they help organize all the raw information that we actually experience. Without that, we wouldn't have anything meaningful to pay attention to, remember, or learn from. So once we pay attention to something and start thinking about it, the brain it kind of has to decide, okay, are we going to keep this information or are we going to let it go? Um, that job belongs mostly to the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is, I kind of see it as like a filing system. It takes the important things we experience, and it kind of helps turn them into long-term memories that we can keep. Um, However, if we don't review or connect what we've learned, the hippocampus may decide it's not worth saving. But when we, actively think about something, and what I mean by that is, like, if we rehearse it, try to explain it or connect it to something we already know, the hippocampus will do its job and file it away across different parts of the brain for future use. So without the hippocampus, we live almost completely in the moment, which reminds me of that. What's that female character in the? I don't know if you remember that movie, 50 First Dates. Uh, I I think it. I'm trying to remember now. So there was an accident. The character, basically, she can't encode daily experiences into long term memory. So when she goes to sleep every night, that day is like wiped away. And theoretically, it's because the hippocampus never successfully filed that day's experience into long term storage. across the cortex. So that's kind of how I see it. Okay, so we've talked about how the sensory cortex brings in raw information and how the hippocampus helps sort out and store the long-term memory. But before any of that happens, the brain needs um, decision maker. So it needs something that controls, what we focus on, what we hold on to, and what we let go. And that's where the prefrontal cortex comes in. I like to think of it as the brain's air traffic controller. It's constantly juggling inputs, making quick decisions, and keeping everything organized so that real learning can happen. So if the prefrontal cortex is damaged, uh, you will see problems in exactly those areas, like making impulsive decisions without really thinking about the consequences, uh, getting easily distracted, having a hard time staying on task. You'll typically see problems with working memory. It'll be harder for people to hold on information and manipulate it in their mind, like simple, like doing, simple math in your head. There'd also be trouble controlling, anger, fear, frustrations, those kinds of emotions, and there'll be difficulty organizing tasks or thinking ahead, even for like basic activities. So not every moment feels the same. Um, I guess when it comes to learning, some of those learning moments stick with us because they were more than just facts. It kind of made us feel something, and I think that's where the amygdala comes in. Um, the amygdala is kind of like the brain's emotional alarm system. Um, it watches for experiences that are exciting, scary, surprising, or kind of relevant or important. And when it spots one, it turns up the intensity. And by tagging those memories with emotion, the amygdala is what makes them stronger and easier to remember. And I think that's why you could probably still remember where you were during a big event in life, or why certain lessons that made you laugh or think deeply about something kind of stick around. In learning, the amygdala reminds us that if something feels important, it becomes important to the brain. Okay, now I want to quickly talk about the different types of memory associated with learning. And forgive me if I feel like I'm rushing through this, but I want to get through this as quickly as I can. So when something happens, and maybe we see something, hear something, or we touch something, it enters our brain through our senses and it lands in what's called sensory memory. I like to think of sensory memory like a kind of temporary holding bin. It grabs whatever just happened, but only for a tiny moment, and I'm talking like a fraction of a second. And if you don't pay attention to it, it disappears before you even realize it was there. But if you focus your attention, that experience moves into short term memory. And that's where, short term memory is anywhere from about 15 to 30 seconds. The thing is, short term memory is just that. It's short, like I said, 15, 30 seconds. And if we don't work with that information, it will fade also. So, real learning happens when the information makes it into our working memory. Kind of like it's kind of like our brain's mental workbench. So here we don't just hold on to ideas. We kind of work with them. We organize them, compare them, connect them, stuff we already know. Um, but here's the really cool part, or at least the part I think is really cool. When we do that active thinking, process, especially um, using the prefrontal cortex, we actually start to change our brain, which, as you know, this is called neuroplasticity, and how our brain can rewire itself and strengthen its connections between neurons, and it essentially just makes things easier to store and recall information later. Uh, if we keep working with new ideas through practice, however, connecting, other knowledge and stuff, or talking about it, the hippocampus steps in and starts encoding it into long-term memory. Once it's there, it gets sorted into different types of memory. And as you can see on the slide, we have episodic memory. That's like our personal life events. Semantic memory, that's kind of like a general and factual knowledge. And then procedural memory, your skills and habits, like riding a bike, or learning how to fly an airplane. And if there's an emotional aspect to this memory, if it's exciting, stressful, or meaningful to that person, the amygdala kind of steps in to make sure you don't forget about it too easily. Later on, when you need that information, your prefrontal cortex will help retrieve that from long-term storage. So yeah, it's really interesting how all of this comes into play. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about my real world connection to all of this. Okay, so I know I've mentioned in this class and in the previous CRTV 600 course that I'm an instructional designer, and I work with a company that has a contract with the Air Force, and currently we're helping the Air Force with their undergraduate pilot training. So in undergraduate pilot training, the student pilots, they're really faced with a huge amount of information that they have to kind of deal with daily, and how they process, retain, and apply that information. Uh, it's not just about hard work. It's really about how their brains can handle all the information, all the inputs, the sensory inputs, the attention, memory, and the learning that has to happen in order for them to become competent pilots. So my perspective is that if we understand how the brain works, we can train pilots to be smarter, faster, and we can produce pilots more quickly. So one thing I became very aware of early on in my experience with the undergraduate uh, pilot training is that the students are absorbing highly complex information, fast-paced sensory information while they're making, life-critical decisions. So going back to the need for understanding how people learn, if I know working memory is limited, I know I'm going to need to divvy up the lessons or learning experiences into kind of more manageable chunks, sorry, which is one strategy. Um, and with so much coming at them every day, we also try to prioritize the most important inputs and build in that repetition and practice. So another interesting strategy the Air Force has used for decades is called chair flying. I never heard of it until I started working on this contract, but essentially, students mentally rehearse every steps of a flight while they're on the ground. And let me play a little bit of this video so you can have a better idea of what I'm talking about. If you want to look for it online, it's easy just to go to YouTube and search for chair flying, and this particular video is from the Blue Angels. They're Navy, but this is just a really good demonstration of what chair flying is. So let's go ahead and take a look at it real quick.
Vertical 5-5. Easing more power. Ease the pull. Rolling out. The loop break. Cross. Right jump. Vertical 5-5. Easing more power. Ease the pull. Rolling out. The loop break. Cross. Right jump. Smoke up push.
Okay, yeah, so that's just a little clip. I definitely would encourage you to go and search for it on YouTube. It's really interesting. So, what you saw there was essentially a mental practice session in all the cockpit procedures, the verbal communications, even the inflections that they use while they would be in the air. And you saw the physical movements that they would actually do in the air as well, but it's all taking place on the ground. And that's why they call it chair flying, because they do it all from the chair on the ground. And what I find particularly fascinating is all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes in the brain. So even though they're not in the air, this chair flying session is actually activating kind of like the key areas in the brain that they would be using. So again, you're talking, premotor cortex, supplementary motor area, the parietal lobes, cerebellum, even the kind of the motor cortex in general. And again, what I find fascinating is how the brain treats these kind of mental and physical rehearsals. It treats them almost exactly the same way as they would be in a real flight. One term that I found as a result of this kind of trying to learn more about this is the theory of functional equivalence, which in itself is fascinating. But I don't want to get too much into it here. I threw up some, or not threw up, I put some references on the slide here that kind of talk to it. But it's this whole process of chair flying and how the brain reacts to it is really interesting. So, moving on, with each repetition, these individuals are what's happening is they're strengthening their neural pathways through this repetition. So, every session of this chair flying, it's not just practice, it's literally reshaping the brain through neuroplasticity. And, it's a great preparation tool, for them to be able to perform more smoothly and confidently under, a real world conditions. And I just think that's a really cool strategy. And again, the Air Force has been using this for decades. Super cost effective. It's effective for learning, and the biggest thing is there's no need for technology whatsoever. So why do I think all of this matters? Um, I really believe pretty strongly that every instructional designer should have at least a kind of working understanding of how people learn. Um, at the end of the day, kind of my job, it's not just about putting information into a course. Well, it is, but it's also about helping people build skills, remember important knowledge, and apply it when it matters. The reality is, at least from my perspective, most instructional design programs don't really spend much time, you know, teaching how the brain works, or how memories are formed, or what really helps, learning stick. Um, and that's really just from my personal experience. The programs I went through didn't really do any of that. So a lot of new instructional designers that come into the field, you know, they'll know how to create a lesson or integrate technology, but they won't have a clear sense of how learning actually happens, inside the brain. And I think if we're serious about creating training that's effective, especially in kind of high stakes environments, like healthcare, the military, or aviation training, we need more than good content organization. We need to design learning for how humans are wired to learn. And I really think it's just a huge gap in our field, and one that needs to be fixed. Okay, so just to kind of wrap everything up, uh, when we understand how memory, attention, and neuroplasticity works, uh, it allows instructional designers like me to design training that's more efficient and effective. So instead of overwhelming students with walls of text, or just kind of giving them too much at once, uh, we can structure lessons uh, to, I guess, respect working memory limits. And what I mean by that is that we can make it easier for, in my case, make it easier for new pilots to absorb and apply information quickly through understanding the limits of the memory, working memory. Um, I think this helps us reduce kind of mistakes, and it also speeds up mastery of whatever's being taught, because when pilots practice in ways that match how the brains store information, I think they're better prepared to perform under real world conditions. Um, I think it also means that the learning we build will actually stick better too, um, through active learning, active thinking, emotional engagement, repetition, practice. We tap into neuroplasticity, which helps the brain kind of rewire itself for durable learning and retrieval of skills. And I think in high stakes fields like, again, aviation, uh, it's not just an academic thing. Um, it can literally save lives. And I know it's kind of dramatic, but you know, if you think about it, if a pilot forgets a critical procedure in an emergency, the results would be, it's horrible. And I think by understanding how human learning works, we create training environments that will, I don't know, build stronger, faster, more confident pilots, and ultimately, that leads to a stronger Air Force for the United States. Okay, so that's all I have for this presentation. Look forward to any feedback you have. All right, thanks, Dr. Betts.